Members of the Senate, that now takes us to page 5 under Special Order S423 by the Senator from Beaufort and others. The reading clerk. We have an amendment or amendments on the desk. Senator from Darlington, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
We're on third reading, and it will require 3/5 vote for any amendments. And so my first question is that do we have how many amendments do we have on the desk?
I'm informed that currently we have 9 amendments on the desk.
Okay.
So we will proceed. First Amendment. Reading clerk will publish.
First Amendment is by Senator Cash. It amends the bill, Section 4, strike Section 44, 532410, subsection A, Item 6, and inserts Item 6. The number of integrated operator licenses allowable pursuant to this section as recommended by the Commission as being sufficient.
Senator from Senator from Darlington, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Mr. President, I would make a unanimous consent request.
State your request.
Unanimous consent in the essence of time that we allow amendments on third reading without the 3/5 vote.
Is there objection to the unanimous consent request to allow amendments on third without the 3/5? Objections heard. You can give it. Under the rules, a brief explanation can be provided before the termination of the 3/5 vote. We do not debate the amendment before that, but a brief explanation. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash is recognized for a brief explanation on his amendment. Need a copy of the amendment. Yes, sir. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash.
All right, so this is an amendment that would ensure that when we have integrated operator licenses, where an integrated operator is performing more than one function, in other words, they are growing the cannabis, they are transporting it, and they're perhaps even operating a retail establishment, that for each function that they are performing, that requires a license for that function, then that counts for one of the licenses for that function in the overall number of licenses that can be given out according to what's enumerated in the bill already.
Question is...
Move adoption.
Well, the question is whether we take up the pending question is the 3/5. All those that consider in favor of considering the amendment, please say aye. Roll call has been requested. The 5 members second the call. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. More than 5 have seconded. Members of the Senate, the question before us is the consideration of the amendment on third reading. The roll call has been requested and granted under our rules. The reading clerk will call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Adams? Aye. Mr. Alexander? Aye. Aye. Mr. Allen? No. Mr. Bennett? Aye. Mr. Campson? Aye. Mr. Cash? Aye. Mr. Clemmer? Aye. Mr. Corbin? Aye. Mr. Cromer? Aye. Mr. Davis? Aye. Mrs. Devine? No. Mr. Fanning? Aye. Mr. Gambrell? Aye. Mr. Garrett? Aye. Mr. Goldfinch. Aye. Mr. Grooms. Aye. Mrs. Gustafson. Aye. Mr. Harpootlian. No. Mr. Hembry. Aye. Mr. Hutto. Not voting Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson not voting Mr. Kevin Johnson. Not voting Mr. Michael Johnson. Aye. Mr. Kimbrell. Aye. Mr. Loftus. Aye. Mr. Malloy. Aye. Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin not voting Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey votes aye. Mrs. Matthews has leave. Mr. McElveen. Aye. Mr. McLeod votes no. Mr. Peeler. Aye. Mr. Rankin. Not voting Mr. Rickenbaugh. Aye. Mr. Rice. Aye. Mr. Sabb. Aye. Mrs. Sin. Aye. Mr. Sexler. Aye. Mrs. Shealy. Aye. Mr. Stevens. No. Mr. Talley. Aye. Mr. Tedder. Aye. Mr. Turner. Aye. Mr. Verdon. Aye. Mr. Williams votes aye. Mr. Young. Mr. Young votes aye.
Have all senators voted? Senator Rankin votes aye. Senator Jackson votes aye. Senator Kevin Johnson votes aye. Senator Allen votes aye. Have all members voted? Last call. Polls are closed and the clerk will tabulate. By a vote of 39-4, the amendment is before us. Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Move adoption of the amendment.
Pending question was adoption of the amendment. All in. Senate will stand at ease momentarily. The pending question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor would please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The reading clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is amendment number 4 by Senator Cash, amends the bill, section 4, strike section 4453.
Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Mr. President, I move we allow the amendment.
Question is the 3/5 allowing the amendment. Those in favor would say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is not. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise?
Explain the amendment.
You're recognized on your amendment. Senator from Anderson.
Members, this amendment simply adds one of the potential risk for taking medical cannabis back into the bill that we voted as we voted on it 2 years ago, and that risk is the variability of the quality and concentration of cannabis products.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
If the senator would yield for a question.
Senator, yield for a question?
Senator,
Senator yields.
Senator, at the appropriate time, I'm going to support this amendment. I think it makes express and explicit in the bill something that's implicit, but it's always better to be declarative when we have an opportunity to.
Thank you. Move for adoption.
The pending question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. We have further amendments. The reading clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash. It amends the bill, Section 4, strike Section 44, 53, 2230, and inserts.
Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Move we allow the amendment on third.
Motion is to allow the amendment on third reading. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is before us. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise?
The amendment.
You're recognized. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash.
All right, this amendment deals with the question of what we call open container. And again, it goes back mostly to what we had in S-150, except that it does allow, if you're the passenger in a vehicle, that you could have the product concealed on your person or in your personal property. For instance, if you were riding as a passenger in someone's car and you had a vape pen that you needed to have with you, you could have that in your pocket, or you could have it in your purse, but so that you would be able to have access to it. It wouldn't have to be left at home, but other than that, it's an amendment that prevents the open display of the cannabis products.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
If the senator would yield for some questions.
Senator, yield for questions?
Senator yields.
Senator yields.
Senator, I think I'm going to support this amendment as well. I think this gets back to what I explained earlier, that I had misinterpreted what the desire of the body was, just to be specific as to anti-vaping in cars, but there was a sentiment in this body to prohibit open containers, or similar to the open container laws. So this really brings it back to what was in 150. Is that correct?
More or less,
with the one
it's a little bit
qualification.
more liberal in that you could have it concealed on your person or in your purse if you're a passenger. Yes.
I support this. Thank you, Mr. Senator.
Move for adoption.
The question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Further amendment on the desk.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash. It amends the bill in Section 4. It strikes Section 44, 53, 25, 60, and inserts.
Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Allow consideration of the amendment on third reading.
Motion is to allow consideration on third reading of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is before us. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Explain the amendment.
You are recognized on your amendment. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash.
All right, this amendment has to do with removing or deleting a line in the bill, the effect of which is currently, if you're voting for this bill and you recuse yourself from the vote, then you could be, you could immediately go into the business, so to speak. So this simply removes that line that allows you to be able to do that simply by recusing yourself from the vote. Because other than that, you would have to wait at least 5 years to be able to be involved in a medical cannabis business. Move for adoption.
Senator from Williamsburg, what purpose do you rise, sir?
See whether the senator from Anderson would yield.
Senator yield for question.
yields.
Senator yield for question.
And Senator, I want to go ahead and state at the outset, the question is really not related to this amendment. It's related to the last one. It kind of caught me real quick. But what I was curious about and perhaps I should know this given all of this debate, but I don't. So I wanted to confess the absence of knowledge on that. Is there a card or a prescription that persons that are permitted to use medicinal marijuana are to have on their person? And the reason why I asked is I was just thinking about the scenario where the individual is allowed to have the vape thing with them, and but for the fact that this is somebody who's legally allowed to carry it, is permitted to have it, how do we distinguish between the ones that are legally able to and the ones that might just say,
Right. I might have to defer to the senator from Beaufort a little bit. I mean, the language of the bill speaks of a card holder.
yes, sir?
And so I would assume that there's a physical card that someone has and can carry around in their possession.
Thanks, sir.
Yes.
The pending question is adoption of the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Have a further amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash, amends the bill in Section 10 by inserting Section 10. This act shall be repealed.
Senator
5 years.
from Lawrence, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Mr. President, I move that the amendment be allowed for consideration.
Motion is to allow consideration of the amendment on third reading. Those in favor of that motion would please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Explain the amendment.
You're recognized on your amendment.
All right, this one I think is a little bit more substantial. This amendment deals with the sunset clause. I have felt this was important from the very beginning that the bill have a sunset clause. It's a very complicated bill to start with, 60 pages or more. And I think my concern and concern that we all share, and particularly in complicated bills of this nature, is are there going to be unintended consequences? As much as the bill has been gone over with fine-tooth comb, are there going to be unintended consequences that need to be addressed, and need to be addressed by more than perhaps regulation can address? So, Senator from Beaufort, I'm simply not comfortable with the 8-year sunset clause. This amendment makes it 5 years. I will say this about the bill. I have studied it a lot, and at the end of the day, I find myself a lot in the same position I was a few years ago, which is, to me, this bill is just about a toss-up, okay? One day I could vote against it, and the next day I think I'm for it. And Senator from Horry, did you know that, I can't ask you a question, but I will tell you, part of the reason is I take your concerns and others in this body seriously, that we are weighing in the balance what good that medical cannabis could do for people and what harm might come in regards to those who become card holders, especially in the demographics you mentioned, that in some states it's the healthiest demographics have the most card holders, young men between the ages of 20 and 40, because they get the card for PTSD or chronic pain. And again, in a number of states, those are the conditions for which most of the cards are held. So all that to say that I have some real concerns about weighing in the balance there, and sometimes I'm not sure which way to go, and I guess at the end of the day, on the 2 votes I have made, I have decided to err on the side of pain relief for those who need pain relief and can't get it in any other way that is helpful to them. That doesn't mean that I'm oblivious to the public safety effects, whether it's people who might use the product and drive impaired, or possibly even people who get a card because really they just want to sample marijuana in a very legal way and then become addicted to it.
Senator from Charleston.
And then might go on to
Senator Tedder, what purpose do you
another
ask?
drug in addition to that.
Mr. President, I'm asked if the senator would yield for a question.
Senator yields.
Senator yields for question.
Thank you. Senator, I'm just curious, there's already a sunset clause in this bill, correct?
There is.
And so my concern is, did you know that the senator from Beaufort has made a lot of concessions to appease everybody in this body to get this bill through that he's worked extremely hard on? My question to you is, what is the purpose for you limiting it from 8 years to 5? If there's already a sunset clause in there, so we know at some point this will happen, what is your purpose? Explain to me, please, why the difference in 5, and what's the main purpose of your goal here with that?
Well, the purpose is if there is a great negative unintended consequence as a result of passing this bill that comes about through the language or through some other unforeseen circumstance, we have the ability to address that sooner rather than later. And really, I understand where you're coming from. 2 years ago, I passed 20 amendments to the bill. It's a complicated bill. It's the most complicated bill I've dealt with in the years that I have been here. And so I just don't think we can say, well, we're going to pass it and it's good for 8 years and we hope everything's fine in the meantime. Personally, I'd prefer to come back to it in less than 5 years, 4 years. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, I'm making concession to ask for 5 years, but it's going to be, you know, what the will of this body is. But I have heard on other legislative matters that just a few words in a bill completely changed the way that the bill worked out in real life. And so I want the body to be able to come back at an earlier date than 8 years. Now, Senator from Beaufort, I know that you have already expressed that you are trying to have a period of time in which the startup costs can be recaptured. And I get that. So I'm not one who is planning to get into the business, so that's not really my concern. My concern is, did you know this bill is just about a toss-up to me? And so because of public safety, I want the body to be able to come back to this sooner. And if there's a big problem, I want, because of the sunset clause, to have the leverage to fix it.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
If the senator from Anderson would yield for some questions.
Senator yield for questions.
Senator yields.
Senator yields.
Senator, did you know, I think you accurately described the kind of balancing we're doing here. On the one hand, guarding against unintended consequences and providing a means for us to address them more promptly against the certainty that capital markets want in terms of making a capital investment. And did you know that I'm going to support your amendment because the way I've characterized this bill throughout is that I want to come up with a template for what a conservative medical cannabis bill looks like, distinguishing it in as many ways as I can from those in states in which there have been unintended consequences or there have been outcomes that weren't anticipated. And so in an abundance of caution and to wear belt and suspenders, in addition to the regs that promulgated by pharmacy and by DHEC or Department of Public Health, and in addition to the other checks and balances that the advisory committee has, I think that in order for us to be conservative and cautious in regard to complex legislation, I will be voting in favor of your 5-year sunset.
Senator from Richland, Senator McLeod, what purpose do you rise?
Will the senator yield for a couple of questions?
Senator Yields.
Senator Yields.
Senator Yields for questions.
Thank you, Senator. I just have some questions about going from 8 to 5. Did you know, for those of us who suffer with chronic health conditions, that research shows medical marijuana would treat and help give us a better quality of life? Did you know I'm baffled by how you can advocate for a sunset provision that is less than the one that is already in the bill, because it seems like just another effort to weaken the bill. And this bill, did you know, is one of the most restrictive, one of the most conservative in the country. And I am concerned, did you know, that people who suffer, many of them won't even be able to access medical marijuana to treat their conditions. So can you expound on your rationale, since, you know, sunset provisions aren't in any of the other legislation that this body has passed, whether it was abortion or abortion restrictions or book banning or death penalty. I mean, every bill we pass, did you know, can have negative consequences and negative implications, but yet we seem to be going in circles, and I'm just trying to understand why.
Senator, I don't share your characterization that we're going in circles. We had the votes to get second reading, and I suppose at the end of the day, we're going to have third reading, and that for the second time, the Senate will have passed this bill. So if you're in favor of medical cannabis, and I have voted for it on both occasions, I think we're actually moving forward. Now, as I described, and I'll just have to describe it again because you're asking for my rationale, it's not a slam dunk vote to me. Now, for some people in here, this is a slam dunk vote for either for it or a slam dunk vote against it. And I understand the arguments on both sides. And my vote is pretty close to just a toss-up, because I do want to help people who have conditions that have been scientifically proven to be helped by medical cannabis.
Thank you.
But I also
Appreciate
understand the concerns that have been raised that are legitimate concerns and are verified through the data. One concern is that in a number of states, it is some of the healthiest demographics that have the vast majority of the cards, young men between the ages of 20 and 40. Okay, so there is concern about balancing the good we want to do for those who are suffering and for those for whom medical cannabis can assist, but we're balancing that against public safety concerns. And so
I get that, did you know?
With all that in context, if the language of this bill somehow, in some way, if the bill does not work as the senator from Beaufort has put it forward to work, and I think everyone in this body would agree that it's an extremely complicated bill, I want the opportunity to fix it sooner rather than later. That's the rationale.
Did you know, thank you for that, Senator. Did you know that I believe it would be more prudent, more beneficial for us to give it a little more time, not less, to see how it, I mean, we've spent, what I meant by going in circles is, we've spent an inordinate amount of time talking about the what ifs. And we know that this state is in the minority when it comes to our bill. Like I said, it is much more restrictive, much more conservative. We put there are different components of the bill that will hopefully help avoid much abuse, but every bill that we pass is subject to abuse by those who want to abuse it. Would you agree with that?
Senator, I would simply say that the subject matter of this is obviously, because it's taken however many years to pass it, much more difficult and problematic to address in law, and much more complicated than a lot of the bills that we pass here on a unanimous vote. And there probably are some bills, I certainly don't have all the knowledge to know which of our laws have sunset clauses, but I think probably we have passed some bills with sunset clauses, and quite frankly, I could not have voted for this bill, and I would not have voted for it without a sunset clause. I mean, that's just how close the vote is to me.
I heard you say that, and did you know that at the time I didn't fully understand the need for a sunset clause, but now that we have an 8-year sunset provision in the bill, I'm still at a loss, and I've heard your explanations, but I'm still at a loss as to why you would want to lessen that by 3 years instead of keeping it the full 8 so that we can really see the impact that this bill, as restrictive and as conservative as it is, as you guys have made it, so that we can really give it that time to see the impact that it will have.
I understand, Senator. I mean, I can't do more at this time other than to repeat myself, but I will say this. It is, I will take it at face value that it's perhaps the most restrictive and conservative bill in the country, but did you know that in our region of the country, I don't know if there's any other state that's allowing medical cannabis, or let me say it a different way, most of the states that are not allowing it are probably in the southeast. So whatever that means to you, it means that it's taken the careful work of the senator from Beaufort to put before us a bill that we would feel comfortable enough passing, and we're a state in a region of the country where a lot of states have not gotten as far as we have in regards to medical cannabis.
Well, did you know I appreciate your support of this bill, and I am just grateful to see it, because there are a lot of people who are suffering in South Carolina and who need access, and I hope that my concerns about the restricted nature of the bill won't keep those who really need it from gaining access to it.
Senator from Richland, Central Pulliam, what purpose do you ask?
Will the senator yield to a question?
Senator, yield for questions. Senator yields.
I am fascinated by sunset clauses. Fascinated. I got to tell you, I, in my memory, have a distant recollection of doing one once before here. But I'm just trying to figure out what the criteria is. I understand yours is, it was coin toss, and you wanted to make sure that you erred on the side of caution, and that that would mean a sunset. So it wouldn't be there forever. It's not indelible, correct?
Sorry, Senator, what's not indelible?
The law. The law is, I mean, there's an option to, not just an option, this is sunset. It's going to end.
No, that's correct.
Okay. And so I'm trying to, this is more about what are we going to do on other legislation? What are we going to do? For instance, you said this is a close call for you. There are cases in which, that are not close calls for me, but are cases in which there are. And so, for instance, we're going to have transgender legislation coming up, where the House is playing all kinds of games, and now there's a subcommittee here, it's going to hit the floor. Some of it is, I got to tell you, some pieces of it I cautiously might vote for, others I wouldn't. But wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and sunset that law so that we can figure out what happens over, hell, why wait 5 years? Why not just 3 years and figure out what happened? And then we could all have some record of, how many kids killed themselves, how many kids got the treatment, then we'd have a track record. Shouldn't we? This is, to me, a good thing. That we're now establishing this concept that, close call, let's sunset it. We're going to be voting on a restructured DHEC next week. It's going to be a close call. you would agree perhaps to a sunset provision on that if we tried for 5 years and it doesn't work? What do you think?
Well, Senator, I think the sunset idea could be considered on any bill, and any senator in here is free to offer an amendment on any bill for such a clause.
Well, and I would agree, and as I told a high school class, I think yesterday, as they sat up in the balcony, there's the old saying, those weak of stomach should not watch sausages or laws made. And I think this may be one of those times where the sunset provision is interesting. Look, we all want to vote for this bill. If this is what it takes to vote for it, I'm going to vote for it. I'm going to vote for your amendment. But I'm just wondering what the criteria for a sunset. Because when I talk about sunset on some piece of legislation later this session or next year, I don't want anyone to stand up and say, that's an outrageous idea, because Senator Richard Cash, developed this idea because he was uncomfortable with flipping a coin on the bill. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, but I do believe the idea far predates me, and the senators who've been here longer could testify to that. If there are no further questions, I move for adoption.
And before we do that, I would just remind us we refer to the senators as the senator from the counties, from where they're senator from Anderson. Not a problem. Just reminding the body. Pending question is adoption of the amendment. Those in favor would please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Reading clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is by Senator Cash, amends the bill, Section 4, strike Section 4453.
Senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I move that the Senate receive the amendment from the senator from Anderson.
Those in favor of giving the opportunity to discuss the amendment would say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. So ordered. The senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise?
To explain the amendment.
You're recognized on the amendment.
Be glad to.
Senator from Anderson.
Mr. President, I would ask for unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment. It's no longer needed.
Unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment. Here, no objection. The amendment is withdrawn. Reading clerk will publish the next amendment.
Next amendment is number 12 by Senator Cash. It's a bill, Section 4, strike Section 4453, 2010, Item 21, and inserts Item 21.
Senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I move that the Senate receive the amendment from the senator from Anderson.
Motion is to receive the amendment for consideration on third reading. Those in favor would say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is before us. Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you rise?
Explain the amendment.
You're recognized on your amendment. Senator from Anderson.
Members, this is a very simple amendment. It deals with the definition of medical use, definition 21, and simply reinserts a sentence that was removed, that was in S-150 but is not in S-423, just to strengthen and make clear throughout the bill that medical use does not include smoking.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
I'd see if the senator will yield for some questions.
Senator, you have for
yields.
questions? Senator Yields.
Senator, did you know that this bill is several references to you cannot consume medical cannabis through burning of flower, but I think it's always better to be over-inclusive than under-inclusive, so at the appropriate time, I'll be supporting your amendment.
If there are no further questions, I move for adoption.
Pending question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Reading clerk will continue to read.
Next amendment, number 14 by Senator Verdon. It amends the bill, Section 4, strike Section 4453, 2010, subsection 25, item A, and inserts.
Senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you ask?
Mr. President, I humbly ask the leave of the Senate to receive Amendment 14.
Motion is to receive amendment number 14 in the Senate for consideration. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is before us. Senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you ask, sir?
Mr. President, I wish to be heard.
You're recognized on your amendment. Senator from Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I'm asking for the inclusion of podiatrists for the privilege of prescribing. Historically, as I've been involved, either to whatever degree, I've been a proponent of a tightly constructed, carefully considered medicinal cannabis program for the state of South Carolina. I'm on record numerous times for and espousing one of the tightest programs I believe that the country has seen so far, and it is my hope and desire when we do pass a medicinal cannabis program in South Carolina that other states will seek to claw back to our position here as it relates to availability, strictures on prescription, strictures on dispensing. So when I ask for you to consider the inclusion of podiatry, it's within the context of really stricture rather than expansion. So my argument before you is that if we would include the practice of podiatry for the ability to prescribe this product, it's because within this very narrow practice, there is an acute need that may not, and in many cases likely will not, have the same level of attention. Now, I'm not criticizing or denigrating the practice of orthopedics, but in my experience, and I'm really hearkening back over 6 years, Senator from Cherokee, Senator from Beaufort, y'all know how we struggled to bring some reconciliation, to bring some harmonization to what was then called the expansion of podiatry. And through a lot of work, through a lot of listening, we were able to hammer out what rightfully is considered to be letting a podiatrist practice to his level of ability and training. So when you're talking about soft tissue and even hard tissue surgical procedures in an area that is definitely within the realm of neurological diseases, in an arena that many times does not get the care and attention that it needs, it's really a backwater problem that we have a lot of times as it relates specifically to diabetic neuropathy and certainly extremities, neuropathy of the extremities.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you ask, sir?
If the senator from Lawrence would yield for some questions.
Senator, yield for questions.
Yes, sir.
Senator yields for questions.
Senator, as I read the amendment, there's nothing in here that would expand a podiatrist's scope of practice. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. I wouldn't open that up
Right.
for love or money,
Because I
Senator.
think, was it 3 or 4 years ago that we sat out there in the lobby, and as you said, we
I'm
kind of
thinking it's
hammered out
6.
the jurisdiction that the various professionals had over the leg. And I can recall acutely discussing how far up the ankle
You handled all that work.
that the
and-
orthopedic
and I-
surgeons were willing the podiatrists to go. And of course, they're, anyway, so is it true to say that there are going to be some of the qualifying conditions in this bill, which have been very narrowly defined, some of those qualifying conditions are not going to fall within the purview of a podiatrist by virtue of that very specific scope of practice legislation. Is that
Absolutely.
correct? So
Absolutely.
you're only talking about allowing podiatrists to authorize the use of medical cannabis, provided it's within their designated scope
Exactly.
of practice.
You see my amendment. I amended very
saw that.
strictly within their
Okay.
scope.
Thank you. I will support it at the appropriate time.
Well, thank you. Mr. President, if there are
Yes,
no
sir.
other questions, I would move adoption.
Question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. We have a further amendment. Reading clerk will please publish.
Amendment number 15 by Senators Cash and Davis amends the bill in Section 4.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you ask?
I respectfully request consent to have this particular amendment taken up on third without the 3/5 requirement. Or with the 3/5
With the
requirement.
3/5 requirement. All those in favor of allowing the amendment with 3/5, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is before us. Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you ask?
To be heard on the amendment, Mr. President.
You're recognized on the amendment. Senator from Beaufort.
Thank you, Mr. President. I co-sponsored this particular amendment with the senator from Anderson. The way I've described this bill throughout has been that there is a high bar on the front end in terms of a medical physician or doctor having to authorize its use as to a certain number of limited conditions. And then there is a tight restriction on the back end in regard to a pharmacist needing to be involved in the dispensing of cannabis. Because one of the things that's going to distinguish our program from every other state's is we have medical professionals at the front end and at the back end, because that's in keeping with it being a very conservative medical bill. Senator from Anderson raised some good questions the other day about whether or not a pharmacist in charge who has to be physically present on the premises at all times cannabis is being dispensed, whether or not things might get so busy that even though you say that a pharmacist has an obligation or as a matter of practice will consult, then maybe they're too busy. And this amendment states that in terms of a standard of care for a pharmacist, in order to discharge that standard of care, that for a first-time cannabis user or a first-time individual who's been authorized to consume cannabis for a medical purpose by a physician, that there has to be an in-person consultation between that physician, between that pharmacist in charge and that patient, that we want there to be that personal interaction back and forth at a minimum at that very first meeting. Because as the Senator from Anderson pointed out, the nature of cannabis as medicine is to some extent trial and error on the back end. You don't know exactly what sort of strain of cannabis, what sort of ratios is going to interact with the cannabinoidal system to address the underlying problem, and ensuring that there is a pharmacist consultation for that first patient visit for certain will provide me with a lot of comfort that this is actually delivering what I have represented to this body is going to be delivered, which is medical authorization on the front end, medical supervision on the back end, and at the appropriate time, I'd move adoption of this amendment.
Senator from Newberry, what purpose do you ask?
See if the senator will yield for a question.
Senator,
Senator yields for question.
Senator, you remember the other day that I asked you a question. We were concerned about pharmacists would have to be available to consult, and it sounded like by phone. But in this, you've got that they must be on the premises 100% of the time during dispensing hours.
And thanks to your experience in the profession, you brought that out and made it clear. And so I feel like we need to be very explicit in regard to our expectations of that pharmacist in that space. Not only to be present, but to be physically present. Not only to be physically present, but to actually consult. And so we're being expressed in that regard to lay down what our expectations are.
Senator, did you know I'm 100% fine with this amendment? I'll be voting for it with.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, move adoption.
Senator from Greenwood, what purpose do you rise, sir?
With Senator Yield?
Sure.
Senator Yield's a question.
I think this is a good amendment. Frankly, we need to have the pharmacists talk to them as well. It seems to me that this bill, and the question is, this bill seems to allow a doctor to say, I'm going to give you this, but it doesn't really, it says may prescribe a certain quantity, quality, potency, et cetera, but it doesn't require him to. Right. So it's actually really not the doctor's decision in my mind, and it concerns me that we need to have a pharmacist to then give the opinion of which one of these items, which strain of these items, which consistency, potency of it, whether it's more CBD than THC or THC than CBD. So I'm glad to hear that this bill it requires shall, and to be honest with you, I'd like for the doctor, I'd love for your bill to have to where the doctor shall at least make a stab at it. When it just says may, I'm concerned that he may not. So just by way of commenting on the prescription, or if not the prescription, the recommendation, I really feel like we need a recommendation from the doctor and then a confirmation from the pharmacist. And one other thing, I say that, and the reason I ask that, 6 months is a long time between the first taking of the medication and being seen again, especially in the first setting. And so having a pharmacist there who's helping the person make that decision, I think is very helpful to your bill.
Thank you, Senator from Greenwood.
Senator from Newberry, what purpose do you rise, sir?
If the Senator would yield for one more question.
Sure, Senator.
Senator
And
Yield's a
Senator, I
question.
apologize. I skipped over one sentence you had in here, and I think we can change it. You might can do it with just requesting that from the president. But you had in here that a pharmacist in charge must have an in-person consultation. There is such a thing as whoever's responsible for that pharmacy is the pharmacist in charge. But if they get so busy that they got 2 or 3 staff pharmacists there, that any one of them, as long as they're a pharmacist, it doesn't matter who's in charge. As long as they're a pharmacist, we wouldn't need that in charge, because that makes it go back to one person's got to counsel every one of those people.
Mr. President, I'd like a unanimous consent request.
State your unanimous consent request.
That in the amendment where I put the language in regard to a pharmacist in charge must have the in-person consultation with a medical cannabis patient who's getting it for the first time, an amendment to take out the in charge, so that, as the Senator from Newberry says, another pharmacist on the premises who doesn't happen to be the pharmacist in charge. It's almost like a broker in charge in a realty thing, but that it would still need to be a pharmacist, but it need not be that one individual who is the pharmacist in charge. So I'd make that unanimous consent request.
Is there objection to the unanimous consent request to delete the in charge? Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I move adoption.
The pending question is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor would please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. We have no further amendments. Senator from Greenwood, what purpose do you rise, sir?
On the bill.
You are recognized on the bill. Senator from Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, Senator from Beaufort, my hat's off to you. You've done a tremendous job for us. As one senator said earlier, 10 years ago, this bill was awful, and you've been working. There's a few more things, and I apologize I wasn't here yesterday. There are a few more things I'd like to talk with you about generally as I talk about your bill. I want you to all know that I'm in favor of medical marijuana. I always have been. I don't have any problem with medical marijuana. I have a problem. A son got addicted to, started off with marijuana, and then he went on to other things. So on June 13, 2016, I lost my son to drug addiction. And so if I appear to be obnoxious or something about this issue, it is very close to my heart. Just as you felt towards your friend, you wanted to make sure your friend solved some of her pain. Well, there's, as you say, there's always this balance that we have to go through. And I appreciate you working on that balance because just as the senator from Anderson said, I'm worried about people starting off with marijuana and then maybe graduating to other things. And we can't afford to lose any of our children to any more drugs. And you know, you might think that it won't happen to you. You try to do a good job raising your children, trying to take them to church, take them to school, make sure all the things they participate in. And sometimes, whether it's genetic, whatever the reason, they decide they're going to use and abuse drugs. And so anything that we can do to try to keep an eye on that we should do that. I'm worried about South Carolina becoming a recreational state. I'm not worried about it being a medical marijuana state, but I'm worried that this gargantuan bill that we have here is going to cost our government $5 to $10 million. I don't know how much. I'm not sure anybody knows how much it's going to ultimately cost us to field this bill. To be frank, I would like to see it about a fourth of the size that it is. Start off small. When we talk about conservatism, we talk about starting off small, building slowly, and then getting the bugs out as we go. But the body as a whole has made a decision that your bill has got second reading, and I certainly appreciate that. One of the things that concerns me about the bill right now is it does away with the earlier two laws that we had in place. In the 1980s and the 2000s, we had two separate laws. The new bill, and maybe 150 also, I'd have to go back and look at it, but did away with the old clinical study analysis or method. But then in the preamble, you say that clinical studies continue to show the therapeutic value of cannabis. So it would seem to me in your research facilities section, we should apportion a portion of that research, dollars in that research, should go to the clinical studies. It just seems to me that just makes good sense. So any of the profits that we're making, shouldn't we also be plowing those back into some type of clinical studies? And I'm with you. I listened to you when you said, you know, that poor woman, Ms. Richardson, might get the placebo and she might not get what she needs. I'm with you. I mean, I totally understand where you're at. But this is, whether we like it or not, if the doctors don't know the combination of CBD versus THC, because they haven't had enough experience with it yet, that concerns me. The reason that concerns me is that 0.06% of everybody that takes this drug is likely to have a psychiatric episode, a paranoid schizophrenic episode. And so if we give them this medication and we don't see them for another 6 months, I was glad to hear the idea of having the pharmacist also talk to them, because I think that's another person that they can go to and get that advice and counsel in case I get sick, in case I've got to go to the emergency room. Your bill does that. Your bill has a provision that says we will look at the number of emergency rooms visits as a result of addiction or as a result of this medication. And so I'm good with that. I think that's obviously the way it should be. But I'm worried about between the time the person takes the drug, the episode, and getting to the hospital. Some of these people could die. I mean, this one lady, as was talked about earlier, went into one of these episodes and killed her boyfriend or mate or whatever he was. So I'm concerned about the disconnect between the timing on an untried drug. I'm more worried about the children, Senator. I'm not as worried about adults. Adults are old enough to make decisions for themselves. But when we talk about children, And a lot of this medicine, helps children. So I'd like the idea of your thoughts on clinical studies. And then there was an addition of podiatrists. If we're going to truly help our citizens, which I want to do, there are also now, and because we haven't had subcommittee hearings, this probably would have come up, we've got several different new cannabis-type products that have been approved by the FDA. And so it seems to me that as opposed to excluding them, which this bill seems to do, it says, and what it does not mean, cannabis does not mean a product approved as a prescription medication by the United States Food and Drug Administration. So there were these four, it's called EPIDIOLEV, Marinol, Syndros, and Sesamil. And I'm sure you're familiar with those. Senator, will you?
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you
I
write?
want to interrupt the senator, but I think maybe it might be helpful to have a discussion in regard to that particular point, because
Senator yield for questions.
you make
Senator
a good
yields.
point there. And
Senator yields.
I'm sorry, the senator would yield for questions.
Yes,
The reason that had to be in there was in order for us to have pharmacists to be the ones who dispense, if that pharmacist is also dispensing a controlled substances, which those particular things are, that the DEA will come in and disallow that, which is what happened in Georgia. And did you know that in the states that have successfully had pharmacists be dispensing medical cannabis, they separately segregate out and have that pharmacist dispensing only things that are already controlled substances. So I take your point as a matter of policy, but as a matter of application, if we did have the controlled substances that were authorized by the FDA included within the dispensing authority of the medical cannabis therapeutic pharmacist, that the DEA may shut it down in the same way they did Georgia. So that's the reason for that. But I take your point as a policy that it would make common sense to have the full range of cannabis products available to that pharmacist instead of just some. I take your point in that regard.
Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose do you write, sir?
See if the senator would yield for a few questions.
Senator yields. Senator yields.
Senators, I understand this conversation. The bill says medical cannabis does not include the FDA-approved drugs, but the bill's not outlawing those drugs. Would you agree? Those drugs can still be prescribed by a physician, can they not?
No, it's not. I mean, if you go, my concern is that if the true intent and purpose of medicinal marijuana is to make sure that the citizens of this great state get every opportunity to have whatever the medication is, whether it's FDA approved. In other words, competition is a good thing. I don't have any problem with if the FDA or other businesses, pharmaceuticals, or whoever wants to produce marijuana that gets to a specific malady. For instance, this EPDIOLEV is a CBD concoction. It doesn't even have THC with it, and it deals with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome or Darvocet syndrome, tuberous sclerosis complex, patients 14 years and older. So again, I can go into each of these four. It just seems to me like when the pharmacist is talking to somebody about a marijuana type prescription, or when the doctor is talking to them about a marijuana type prescription, that these should be in their litany of types, because they're doctors. They can prescribe Schedule I as well as anybody else. So it should be considered when they're making their decision about how to tell the patient what's available. I mean, these that are FDA approved should be discussed, along with the CBD and the THC combinations that they're talking about.
Well, as far as I can tell, Senator, nothing in this bill would preclude a physician from recommending an FDA-approved drug if that's what they choose to do, or if they don't think that's going to be sufficient, recommending what is defined as a medical cannabis, I think the physician still has the latitude to recommend what they think is going to be most beneficial.
That
Would
may
you not
be
agree?
the way of doing it is to make sure that the physician that you've appointed to handle this, to be authorized to handle the medical cannabis solution, also at the appropriate time, if there's a drug that's specific to their need, to advise them about that, hey, by the way, there's also this other drug. So it seems to me they may not be able to get it. I understand your conflict there between, again, it's a federal versus state. That part's still a mess, by the way. But regardless of that, they should be able to go ahead and say, as a standard of care, if you've got something that works for this particular malady, and it's a marijuana product, it seems to me that medicinal marijuana doctor should also prescribe these other FDA-approved drugs.
Well, did you know, Senator, I believe that the doctor can do that. It's just that to get that prescription filled, they'd have to go to a different pharmacy than the medical cannabis dispensary. They just have to go somewhere different to get it.
Right, but I think that doctor should be required to go ahead and tell them about these other drugs in his normal standard of care. That's just, again, these are suggestions, Senator, in order to try to help. The Syndros deals with anorexia and AIDS. Marinol deals with anorexia and AIDS. And then there's something called Succinate. The active ingredient is Nebenon, synthetic THC, similar structure. It deals with nausea, vomiting for cancer patients. So again, these are specific types of FDA-approved drugs that we should also consider. Another concern generally is that any other serious medical condition or its treatment added by the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board as provided for in Section 4451-2030. That seems to me to leave it wide open. I heard your comments yesterday. I was watching you, although I wasn't here. I was watching. And you have reduced it from 16 again. You've come a long way. You reduced it from 16 down to 12. However, when you start getting into the pain discussion, that's just a tremendous number of people in the state of South Carolina. I mean, we have pain clinics and a host of other things where we're trying to get people off of the opioids. And maybe this will help. And maybe there's a specific combination of CBD and THC that will do that. I'm hoping that as this goes forward, that happens. And also on these qualifying research facilities, how much can we modify it to at least put in some amount of clinical studies, because as it is, there are no clinical studies to be done, as I can see. Now, maybe you admit for that. Again, Senator, I'm not sure about that. The other part that you've gone through great lengths to make sure our physicians do what they're supposed to do, the impersonal touch and all that, all of those are great. But then at the end, it says under B, 7B, it says a physician may also choose to include a specific amount of cannabis products certified every 14 days and a reason for the dosage, in which case the qualifying patient shall be limited to those amounts in the verification system. I'm at a loss as to, then if I get a recommendation for medicinal marijuana, what does that mean? Okay, I got back pain. I go see the doc. Doc, I got back pain. I've been being treated with opioids, it didn't work. Don't want to do that anymore. Treat me. So he comes up. I mean, he's not going to tell him whether he needs to vape it or whether or not he needs to eat it as candy, or I don't quite follow what it is he's, what is he prescribing? I mean, is there so much THC and so much CBD? So I see a lot of things that CBD completely takes care of without any THC. And it seems to me that as much CBD without the adverse, those maladies that can be treated with CBD should be. And of course, and if they can't be, and we have to have THC in those, then those should be, added as appropriate. But THC should be the default in this analysis, in my estimation, because THC is where the problems are. There's another problem with children being allowed in a pharmacy. And that one concerns me. We don't allow children into liquor stores. That one concerned me a little bit as to whether or not we really want to be able to let children, especially children that are not card holders, go into a dispensary. One of the reasons for that, I can tell you, just the other day, we had a subcommittee meeting, and you would not believe the number of children that are vaping. You would not believe what we saw. You just wouldn't believe it. They brought in buckets of stuff they got off of 7th, 8th, 9th graders. Unbelievable. So we're allowing our children to go into these establishments, and when they walk in, I've been in one in Colorado, and they've got every kind of paraphernalia that you would ever want. They got every kind of marijuana you would ever want. And of course, it was bagged, regular marijuana. This is something different. So in any event, that's for your consideration as well, to make sure that children, I can find the section where it deals directly with children. And so I do appreciate the idea, though, that 18 to 24-year-olds require 2 doctors. But what about those that are 18 below? I may ask you to, I can't ask you a question, obviously, but obviously these children are going to be treated, the ones who have the certain type of maladies, in spite of the risk of the harm to the brain, as I understand it, and this may be true, may not be, but they're saying that if you regularly use marijuana before the age of 24, you will develop potentially a 9% less IQ. So that concerns me. So obviously those risks would need to be explained to the children, which I think they will be under this bill. So similar to the liquor store idea that children shouldn't be allowed in there, maybe we should consider that, try to make your bill somewhat better.
Senator from Anderson, Senator Cash, what purpose you ask?
See if the senator would yield.
Senator, yield for questions.
Senator, will yield.
Senator, yield for question.
Senator, do you know what section of the bill you're referring to? Because I'm not familiar with the section that is allowing or authorizing children to go into the dispensary. So I want to see it.
Yeah, I'll get it for you. It specifically says they can go in there with their parents. Here it is. It's on the, let's see what the, Senator D.
Senator from Beaufort.
3D, under,
What purpose do you
Once the
ask?
senator would yield for some questions.
Senator will yield.
Senator, yield for questions.
Senator, I think I found the language that you and the senator from Anderson were just talking about. I think it's section 44-53-2490 at the very end, and it reads as follows: a therapeutic cannabis pharmacy shall not allow a person under the age of 18 to enter a therapeutic cannabis pharmacy unless the minor is accompanied by his parent, legal guardian, or designated caregiver. And I imagine that's, did you know that it's in cases where if an adult has a need to go get their medicine and they have their child with them, that they go into, like you would go into a grocery store or wherever else. But I guess your point is that may be the negative implications of that may outweigh the convenience factors of that. I'm quite frankly, I'm fine right now with just deleting unless the minor is accompanied by his parent, legal guardian, or designated caregiver, so that it's only those who have a card can access that premises. I think that's a reasonable point made by the senator from Greenwood. So Mr. President.
Senator from, well,
Sure.
Senator Yields. So, Senator from Richland, Senator Jackson, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Senator Yield for questions. Senator Yields.
Senator, I've been paying attention to your conversation with the senator from Beaufort, and it seems as if he is prepared to strike that. What about a situation with a parent with a child, minor child, baby, and they go in to fill a prescription? They can't go in with the baby?
Senator, I guess they could, but is it a matter of public policy that we want to allow that? I mean, I'm concerned about that, and to be honest with you, we don't allow folks like that into a liquor store. And I think it's more not necessarily a tiny baby. Nobody will probably object if it's a baby. But if it's a little 5 or 6 year old who looks up there and sees all the vapes and all the marijuana and all that, that might be a little different situation.
Senator yield?
Senator Yield.
Senator continues to yield.
Senator, if you strike that language, then a mother who is going in with a chronic illness, go in to get her prescription filled, and she has a 10-month baby in her arm, cannot get the prescription filled with the baby in her arm? If Senator from Beaufort recommend that we strike that?
I would hope that she would, if at all possible, not bring her child to the pharmacy to get her medicine. It's obviously not that much of a problem when it comes to a pharmacy. Okay, but this is where THC, and I don't know if you've been to Colorado, but you should go see what's happened to Colorado and see all the children that are now hooked on recreational marijuana. And I know this is not that, but there are those that believe that because of the largeness, the vastness, the behemoth size of this bill, that it's just a step away from recreational. I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm praying that's not the case. But I'm concerned that that children don't need to be exposed to this if at all possible, unless they got a card.
Mr. President, will the senator continue to yield?
He will.
Senator, did you know that we are a long ways from Colorado? I mean, South Carolina policies, and I mean, we are so far away from a policy, from getting to Colorado. That's a different story. But Senator, help me understand again, a mother running errands, buying groceries, get out of her car, she has to run and get her prescription filled. She has her 6-month-old child in her arm. You're telling me that somehow taking that 6-month-old child is detrimental to the child?
No, not to that child, not a
10-month child?
But an older child, yes. Yes, an older child, yes. I mean, that's my opinion.
Senator,
I respect yours.
Right.
I hope you respect mine.
I do respect yours.
I just don't want to see children being exposed to it unless it's absolutely necessary.
Senator, you know I do respect yours, but I am quite familiar with a recent argument we've had here about parents know best when it comes to books and when it comes to other situations. On one hand, we say parents know best, trust parents. But when it comes to picking up their prescription, parents don't have the, and don't take this the wrong way, they don't have the common sense to know what's best for their 10-month-old child or 2-year-old child or 5-year-old child. How does that jive with parents know best as far as kindergarten books?
Let me explain that. I think I need to explain my thinking on this matter. Suppose under this law, that mother has a card, okay? And let's suppose further that that child, let's say that child is in first grade. Okay, let's take it out a little further. And let's suppose that that child doesn't have a card, but his little buddy in the school with him does have a card.
First grade child?
First grade child, yeah. This bill allows for that. This bill allows for that. If they have a malady that needs to be corrected and dealt with here, it's possible.
With the Senator yield?
So, well, hold on, let me go on through it.
Go ahead,
so,
Senator. Yeah.
So now the child is at school, and his buddy is going to go get the vape for his malady.
First grade?
First grade, whatever it is.
Drive themselves?
And worse than that, the school, listen to me, the school has to give it to him. So now this child goes with his mama to get some marijuana, okay, prescription medicine. Now that child walks in and says, well, little Barney, my buddy over there, he has to take this stuff. Mama, what I got to do to get me some of this stuff? So I'm afraid for these kids. So, Senator, you and I may respectfully disagree, but I think that I'm concerned. We don't allow it in liquor stores. I don't think we ought to allow it in these marijuana.
With the Senator yield again?
Pharmacies, certainly.
So if a 14-year-old child says, I want to read a book, and the mother says, I don't want you to read the book, the mothers have that right to do that. But if a 34-year-old mother with a 6-month-old baby in her arm wants to run in and fill a prescription, that is detrimental to the 6-month-old baby.
As you well know, I'm not saying that it's detrimental to a 6-month-old baby because the 6-month-old baby can't discern. But it is a child and it is under 18 age. I don't know how you're going to stop unless you do it and make it across the board from the time they're born till the time they're 18, then I'm concerned about them going into one of these establishments.
Or, Senator, what about unless you trust the parent?
That's got nothing to do with trusting the parents.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
I don't want the child to be exposed to all the stuff that they're going to see in that medicinal pharmacy. I don't want them to be exposed to the pipes, all the paraphernalia, and all the things associated with it. I mean, that's me. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. I haven't filed an amendment.
Right.
I'm just speaking from the heart and telling you what I like about this bill and what I don't like about this bill.
Senator, and I do respect you. I think the world of you. Great.
Well, you and I
got
are-
great relationship. But the senator from Richland earlier, Senator Harpootlian, said making laws is like making sausage. Nobody wants to see it.
That's right.
Boy, if a high school student was sitting in that balcony and says, we don't trust you to choose your books, nor because we think the parents should have the right to do it. However, we don't trust your parents when it comes to picking up their prescription. That is definitely making sausage.
Senator, all I can say is
that
in my household, if my parents didn't approve of whatever book or the little magazines or whatever we might have had there, not only did they take them, but we went out round back and they reminded us not to do it again. And that's the way I was raised, and I'm just hoping that the future is not going to be like Colorado, where it's okay to do all those things.
Senator from Lexington, Senator Shealy, what purpose do you rise?
To see if the kind senator from Greenwood would yield for a question.
Sir.
Senator Yields.
My neighbor.
That's right, Lexington, wherever you're going to be from. I wanted to see if, I've read this. I've listened to it for several years now. And I think Senator Davis has done a great job. He's cut this thing so thin, I don't even know that you could pour the liquid between the pages on this bill. But from what I understand, and tell me if I'm wrong now, but from what I understand, it's only liquid, right? Not going to be any leaf. So I don't know why there would be any pipes in this dispensary.
Paraphernalia,
Paraphernalia, pipes and whatever.
bakeries, I mean, there's cookies, there's candies.
I don't know. I don't think we can we have cookies and candy in here and gummy bears and?
It's allowed here.
Well, it's restrictions as to what they can be. They can't look like anything enticing to a child. Right. And there, you can't have leaf or flowers or whatever they call them. I don't know because I am not a partaker of medical cannabis or marijuana, so I wouldn't know. I think I missed something in my childhood, but that's another story. But here's what I'm concerned about. Let's say we have the mother or the father who's babysitting the child that day. And so let's say the mother and the father, or the mother, she's by herself. She's been out, like Senator from Richland said. And did you know she's got her groceries, she's tired, but she's just got her 4-year-old. Let's take it, we're not worried about the little baby because the baby's grown up. Baby's 4 years old now. But it's 104 degrees because we are in South Carolina. It's 104 degrees outside. And she's got to go in and get her prescription. Now, she can't leave that 4-year-old in the car because if she does, somebody's going to come bash her car window in, especially if I see it. But so she can't leave her child in the car to go in and get her prescription. She knows if she doesn't go get it now, tonight when she goes home, she's going to be miserable. And she doesn't have anybody to keep her child at home, so she's going to have to bring the child back out with her when she goes back out. So what's she to do? I don't think that 4-year-old child is going to go in there and say, ooh, I want some of those little things in the jar, or I want whatever's back there that they can't see. I don't think, as long as it says that anybody under the age of 18 has to be accompanied by a parent, I can't see saying that no one under the age of 18 can go in a dispensary. I mean, to me, did you know? That's the way I feel. Parents can't leave their children in cars.
They shouldn't.
They shouldn't, you're right.
Absolutely not.
But they can't take them in. They can't take them into a liquor store, but that's different. Because this is medication. The way this bill is written, Senator from Greenwood, it is medication. Now, if you told me they were going in there to buy brownies and leaf and all this stuff, they were going to go home and make a concoction or something, I might, Senator Davis can tell you, did you know that I was the biggest advocate fighting this thing because I thought they were going to be selling gummy bears to children on the street. And I took pictures of candy bars and all these things to these meetings and made them change it. Because, I'm the senator for the children, just ask Senator Malloy. Senator from Darlington, excuse me, that's him. But I just don't see, I'd rather the child go in this store than die from heat in the car, and some people would be that desperate that they would leave their child in the car to go in to get their medicine.
I certainly respect that position, and certainly that's an appropriate position. Both your and the senator, his position are consistent. I'm just telling you where I'm at, and there are those, they left the liquor stores open when they closed our churches. Said that was an essential business. So in spite of that, you still weren't able to bring your child into the liquor store. And if it were into a pharmacy, wouldn't have any problem with it because there's a host of things and pharmacies are set up a certain way. Look, at the end of the day, some of these places are going to be like Senator from Or East was talking about, where they're going to have all these little shops with all these little colors on them and all this stuff out there. So it's called grooming. And there's a history of grooming people for cigarettes back in the day, and there'll be a history for grooming for medical marijuana. And I'm just old enough to know about it. I'm just old enough to warn us about it. And I haven't filed an amendment. And if the good senator who has given, in my estimation, a yeoman's listening to our concerns, if he feels like that would be more helpful to his bill, then that's certainly his prerogative. And let me go on and speak on just a few more topics. We talked about the 10% variance, and we were able to get it down to 5 in the last bill and one of 150 that we were able to get done. My concern on that is is that I know it's the industry standard. I recognize that. We talked about that in the last discussion. You know, maybe the other way is instead of having a tolerance of 10%, is leave the tolerance of 10%, but reduce the amount of potency by 10%. That way you will never be over the amount. I mean, there's another way of doing it. If you think about it, if your potency is for instance, in the oils is, let's see, 8,200 milligrams. If that's your oil, then you can break it down 10%, take 820 off of it, and then have it there. And then if your tolerance reaches 10%, then you're still where you wanted to be to start with. Again, I'm concerned at the earlier stages of this medical marijuana that we don't know. I don't think the doctors know. I don't think the pharmacists know yet about how much CBD and how much THC in combination is going to work for that particular malady. I think it's going to be trial and error. So my only concern is I would rather us err on the side of safety if it is 10%, if that's the standard in the trade, because on all those are prescribed drugs. Those are drugs that have been tested. Those are drugs that have been FDA approved. These drugs have not been. So to the extent that we want to be on the side of caution, that's another way of trying to accomplish that without harming anything else. The other couple of things that concern me, and I'm not sure how to get over it, is with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is federal law, if we run into a situation on a landlord situation or employer situation where if it's deemed to be medicine and the entrepreneur, the business, the small business, is put under a position of either violating the federal law or letting this person work, and maybe they dose and it doesn't cause them to be under the influence. I don't know. But if they're dosing while working, unless it's a completely, it allows that, provided that it is a completely drug-free zone. Now the problem with that is that's expensive for the employer to have to do that. So I don't know how you overcome that. You know, my general idea has always been, and I looked up the case of Gonzalez versus Raich to make sure it was still positive law, and it is still the law of the land. And I respectfully disagree with the senator from Beaufort on whether or not the federal government has changed its position on whether or not this is a Schedule I drug subject to the federal law, and that every time we in South Carolina violate that we are opening ourselves up to a potential charge. And I agree that they've bent over backwards and they put a proviso in there to say, oh, attorney generals don't prosecute that. And I know that the banking institutions, they're all worried about it. How are we going to handle the money? Because the money's illegal money. If it's illegal money, banks don't want to handle it. Doctors don't want to prescribe it. Why don't doctors want to prescribe it? Because it's against the federal law. So we're running into a situation where I'm concerned for the country at this point, not only about medical marijuana, that's a small blip, where the rule of law is falling apart in America. You look at our border, our federal government, and they're actually impeaching Mr. Mayorkas because he's not carrying out the law of the United States on our border. And if you have states that decide they want to be sanctuary states and they want to take in illegals, I mean, you just basically have states telling the federal government to go jump, and that's fine if that's what we want to do. But I will tell us all that we need to think about that every time we do it, because it's one step closer to anarchy when you don't follow the rules. So I've always been concerned about this. I've made my statement clear on the subject, and I can't support the bill, but I sincerely appreciate the hard work and dedication that this Senate has done to try to get a bill that is as safe as possible. Thank you, Mr. President. Any other questions?
Senator from Clarendon, what purpose you ask? You're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Clarendon. Yes.
Members, when I was up here last week, I mentioned a book that I had read, and I recommended it as a good read for this particular subject. And there's another book that I didn't read the entire book, but I read it in the past, and it's a book written by William J. Bennett, and it's entitled Going to Pot, Why the Rush to Legalize Marijuana is Harming America. I found it to be a really good book. But anyhow, when I was up here last time, I talked about the fact that you could find data or statistics or reports to support whatever your stance was in this particular bill. And I know there was some talk about personal experiences that people had with people that they were familiar with and how they benefited from medical marijuana, and I appreciated that. But just like I said with the studies, you can also find people who have varying experiences with marijuana, especially medical marijuana. And I just had two I wanted just to spend a minute or two on to share their experience with you. And one is a lady who sent us a letter, I got the letter somehow, from Greenville County. And I think she said at the time she sent the letter, she was the chairman of the board for the Greenville County Commission on Drugs. And she also mentioned that she had been a practicing attorney for 35 years. But she mentioned that when she was 24 years old, she had just given birth and she had a very bad toothache. And she said, as it would be, she had a good friend of hers who visited her during that time and wanted to see the brand new baby, and she was from Colorado. And so she had marijuana. And she convinced her that, smoke this marijuana and it would help you with the excruciating pain that you're having with the toothache. And she said that she experienced a very pleasant feeling, which she would call a high. And she said she cared a great deal less about her tooth pain from the moment that commenced a relationship with marijuana that has lasted and influenced her all the rest of her life. She said marijuana was a gateway drug for her, and her desire to be free of pain was a gateway experience into what became a very serious substance use addiction to alcohol and drugs, an addiction driven by intense cravings to experience a high that substances provided. And she said that, when she couldn't get the marijuana, which she used on a daily and sometimes a twice daily basis, she settled for alcohol, but marijuana was her drug of choice. And she said she tells us this to appreciate the power of marijuana and the nature of addiction. It matters not that a person's initial experience is to choose marijuana to ameliorate pain, she said. What matters is that marijuana used for medical or any other purpose is going to precipitate the effect that marijuana invariably precipitates, the experience of being high. And a substantial number of people that use marijuana, she says, as medicine and experience that high are going to love that high enough to seek it over and over and over again. They'll develop a dependency on marijuana and crave it, not for the medicinal effect, but for the euphoria, the elevated sense of well-being and comfort that comes from ingesting this powerful drug. I'm not going through all of her 4 or 5 pages, but the last thing I'll say that she said the findings in this proposed bill are biased in the extreme and ignore the 900-pound gorilla, which is an honest debate over the question of what we know about marijuana as a medicine. The findings fail to acknowledge that at this time there is not a body of solid scientific research based on double-blind, peer-reviewed study. The findings tell only one side of the story and disregard the substantial community of medical professionals and researchers who have come out against use of marijuana as medicine. The findings lack full disclosure, failing to say what is probable, if not certain, that some number of users will become addicted and fail to say what is certain beyond any doubt, which is that users of marijuana will invariably, absolutely become high. That was her experience as she tried to find relief from pain from using marijuana. And one more from a doctor. I don't think it's necessary for me to call her name, but I will tell you that she's a medical doctor, Master of Science in Clinical Research, and she's a senior fellow in hospital medicine. She specializes in internal medicine, pain, and addiction, and she's a concerned citizen of South Carolina. And she said that physicians don't have enough information regarding indications for diagnosis, for treatment, efficacy, dosing, or safety to make a decision that allows us to first do no harm. The research trials that were used as the basis of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, Medicine overview of the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids were overall low quality, inconclusive, statistically insignificant, riddled with bias, and did not investigate safety, including side effects, contraindications, and drug interaction. She says there's only modest evidence of therapeutic benefit in a few indications, including multiple sclerosis, spasticity, chemotherapy, related nausea and vomiting, and chronic pain. The National Academy clearly states that for all other conditions evaluated, there was inadequate information to assess the effects of cannabis and cannabinoids. There is highly quality evidence of negative individual and public health consequences related to cannabis use, including increased motor vehicle accidents, acute psychosis with violence, schizophrenia, social anxiety, testicular cancer, cannabis addiction, other substance addictions, cardiovascular events, worsening bipolar disorder, impaired learning memory and attention, and suicidal ideation. And she talked about the increase of issues with overdose from children and abuse of this cannabis. She talks about particular risks of harm or individuals naive to cannabis use. Naive to cannabis use describe most individuals who will be trying to use medical marijuana, and this would be without any physical supervision. There are serious concerns regarding the use of the term medical marijuana, is what she told us. These terms create a false sense of security and legitimization regarding safety, treatment expectations, the legality of medical marijuana, which is currently a federally prohibited substance. And she goes on and on and on. And she talks about how cannabis is an expensive product, and I don't think any health insurance have offered to pay for it. But I don't want to just keep reading to you. I just want to let you know that there are, as I said, other schools of thought. And as I mentioned before, I do have a pain management doctor that I've been seeing for a couple of 3 years, and never has the concept or the term of medical marijuana ever come up. The only person in my 63 years that I have seen take their last breath was my mother back in 2011, who was diagnosed with cancer in 1998. It went in remission. It came back in 2008. The doctor told her she had 3 years, and sure enough, 3 years later, she died. But I was by her side, and I was the one, up until the time she took her last breath, that administered her pain medication, pain relief medication. And again, throughout her whole illness, never did any healthcare professional offer medical marijuana as a relief for her suffering. And if they did, she probably would not have taken it. So I know that this bill is going to pass, and there's going to be some people who make a lot of money, and a lot of young kids will be totally messed up, because I see that already today. I think it was last week at one of the schools in my district, a young kid came into school smelling like marijuana. They took the drug dog and the school resource officer out by his car, strong odor of marijuana, opened the car, which was unlocked, and there was a bunch of marijuana in that car. And this was a high school student. I think that marijuana is not safe, and in only a few cases, maybe, it's not even medicinal. So back in 2012, in Arizona, there were about 34,000 citizens of that state that had access to medical marijuana. 3.76% were using medical marijuana for cancer, 1.53% for glaucoma, 1.86% for AIDS, but 89.8% of those 34,000 citizens in Arizona used had medical marijuana for severe and chronic pain. 73% of that number were males between the age of 18 to 30 years old, which is normally the most healthy part of our population. You look at studies in Colorado and California, you see the same statistics, that the vast majority of the folks who are given medical marijuana are using it for pain, and they're young, pretty much healthy men. Pretty much every state, from what I found, that has allowed marijuana for medical use initially, now have allowed marijuana for recreational use. There was a study in Denver that 75% of teens in treatment program use marijuana that belonged to somebody else. Nationwide, 70% of teens admitted to substance abuse treatment programs claim marijuana as their primary drug of abuse. In 2010, marijuana contributed to 12% of all traffic deaths. We say marijuana don't cause death, but when you look at the whole picture, 12% of all traffic deaths, marijuana contributed. And nearly half of the fatality or the fatally injured drivers who tested positive for marijuana were younger than 25 years of age. And so I've heard the term or the phrase or the concept that you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And I submit to you today that we can put lipstick on marijuana. We can call it medicine. We can call it compassionate. We can say it relaxes people. But at the end of the day, at least according to the federal government, marijuana is still an illegal drug. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Clarington. The pending question is third reading of the bill. Roll call is required. I'd ask the clerk to ring the bell. I ask the reading clerk to call the roll on third reading of the bill S423. Reading clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Adams? Not voting, Mr. Alexander? No. Mr. Allen? Aye. Mr. Bennett? No. Mr. Campson? No. Mr. Cash? Aye. Mr. Clymer? Aye. Mr. Corbin? No. Mr. Cromer? No. Mr. Davis? Aye. Mrs. Devine? Aye. Mr. Fanning? Aye. Mr. Gambrell? Not voting, Mr. Garrett? No. Mr. Goldfinch? Aye. Mr. Grooms? Not voting, Mrs. Gustafson? Aye. Mr. Harpootlian? Aye. Mr. Hembry? No. Mr. Hutto? Aye. Mr. Jackson? Aye. Mr. Kevin Johnson? No. Mr. Michael Johnson? Aye. Mr. Kimbrell? Aye. Mr. Loftus? No. Mr. Malloy? Aye. Mr. Martin? Not voting, Mr. Massey? No. Mrs. Matthews has leave. Mr. McElveen? Not voting, Ms. McLeod? Aye. Mr. Peeler? No. Mr. Rankin? Aye. Mr. Rickenbaugh? No. Mr. Rice? No. Mr. Sapp? Aye. Mrs. Sin? No. Mr. Setzler? No. Mrs. Shealy? Aye. Mr. Stevens? Aye. Mr. Talley? Aye. Mr. Tedder? Aye. Mr. Turner? Aye. Mr. Verdon? Aye. Mr. Williams? No. Mr. Young? Mr. Young votes no.
Senator from Lexington, Senator Shealy, what purpose do you rise?
Consent request.
State your request.
Leave for the senator from Spartanburg, Senator Martin, for the remainder of the day.
Without objection. Senator Grooms votes aye. Other members wishing to cast their vote. Senator Adams votes no. Senator Kevin Johnson.
Unanimous consent request.
State your request, sir.
Leave for the senator from Sumter, Senator McElveen.
Without objection, Senator McElveen has leave. Senator Gambrell votes no. Other members of the Senate wishing to cast your vote. Final call. The polls will close, and the clerk will tabulate. Members of the Senate, by a vote of 24 to 19, S 423 receives a third reading of the Senate. Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Mr. President, we've probably reached a good stopping point for the afternoon, so I want to give an opportunity for unanimous consent requests or for announcements.
Senator from Orangeburg, Senator Hutto, what purpose do you rise, sir?
Unanimous consent request.
State your request.
First of all, unanimous consent to ask Senator Harpootlian to move out of my way. Senator Harpootlian, can you move out of my way a little bit? Okay, thank you. Unanimous consent to congratulate Senator Davis on one of the hardest, longest fought battles in the history of this Senate.
Without objection, the Senate. Thank you, Senator from Orangeburg. Further unanimous consent request. Seeing none. Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise, sir?
I move the Senate do now adjourn.
The motion is that the Senate do now adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? No, the ayes have it. The Senate will stand adjourned to meet at 11 a.m. tomorrow on Thursday.